Thank you very much, Niels. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is JP, or Jan Pieter van Seventer. I lived in the US for a while, so after a while they started calling me JP, because Jan Pieter was just too complicated. They thought Peter was my last name, or they thought it was young Peter, as in Peter Jr. So it became very messy. So JP, that's really what the Americans understand. I had a friend named Geert, and they asked if they could call him Bob. So it's that's what happens to names when you go to the US. I've been in the game industry this year for 20 years. I got my first job in the game industry December of 1998, which is exactly 20 years ago this year. And what I do today, my job today is helping young game startups with their first couple of years of entrepreneurship in the game industry, in the global industry. This is my first incubation team 10 years ago at Dutch Game Garden, Ronimo Games. These are 7 founders, so imagine that, 7 founders, 7 owners. Nicely complicated. And of course they're all equal. There's no CEO in there, so they share all the decision making. So that's part of the fun of my job, is to help creative companies like that with how to set up their business. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. This is what I do today, but I'll share a little bit with you about games, what it means to me, how I got into it, and a few, maybe some sketches, ideas for the future. My background is industrial design in Eindhoven. Before that, I did 3.5 years of mechanical engineering in the US. I did not finish with a degree, but I got a lot of math, a lot of physics, a lot of other stuff. Realized that engineering and design, as when you're a teenager, they sound the same. But when you grow up, you realize they're not. I probably should have gone to a design academy immediately. On the other hand, I'm really glad for the experience that I've had and all the technical stuff. Also the process, the way engineers think, the way they work. It's always benefited me later. And I'm glad I now have a degree. For all those 3.5 years of engineering, there was a lot that I learned while doing that. My mother's American, so I'm a dual citizen. So I've lived in the US for 7 years. And it's kind of comfortable for me to go back and forth, which is also very handy in this very international industry. When I graduated from Design Academy Eindhoven, I figured I would use some of the math that I had learned in engineering, and I played around with a lot of the beautiful shapes that math produces. Math has a lot of beautiful formulas that basically define one of these shapes, and they're in themselves they have a lot of beauty, and I thought it would be cool to see if I could make objects out of these. So I did a lot of stuff with furniture, turned these into chairs. So that's kind of when I came up with these kinds of concepts. And in fact, if you have this is the Apple calculator, and if you just fill in that formula, you'll get this shape, and you can play around with it a little bit. And I exported it to Blender 3D package, where I interned in 1997. I don't know if people use Blender here. Blender 3D, it's one of the most popular free 3D packages. And I was able to produce shapes and stuff. The only thing is I tried to get one of these things printed as this size. This was 98, and it was all still lithography. It's a really expensive way of 3D printing, and it would have cost 25,000 guilders at the time. That same model would now probably cost maybe 50 euros. So needless to say, I never got it printed, but that's one of my ambitions for the evening sometimes when I'm not too busy. Then I went into the game industry. I worked on all sorts of games as an artist. First, 3D drawing is what got me in. I really loved the 3D software packages. In '98, there was very few people who knew how to use that, so it was very easy to get a job in the game industry. I worked for Davelex Games, Red Cat. Anybody play Red Cat? Yes. Yeah, A2 Racer, Amsterdam, and of course, Red Cat. So there was a lot of fun doing that. It was, at one point, the biggest company in the Netherlands. They were based in Houten. and I lived in Utrecht, and I would bike to Houten every day. And I learned a lot about game development, about producing games in large teams, about creativity in large teams and how that can go haywire. We had for Amsterdam 7 artists building levels, and all 7 had their own style. So there was not one universal style. The whole concept of an art director was still new to the company. The company came from accounting software, so that kind of stuff was hard. So that was the kind of stuff that you learn how not to do it, which can sometimes be a much better experience than doing it right the first time. Then I ended up going into the mobile game industry around 2002 and 2003. Little Nokias with colored screens, exactly square, 128 by 128 pixels, which was a lot of fun. I actually liked building that because you could build a game with just the 2 of you. One programmer and then a designer artist. Worked on some IP like Fear Factor or Stratego. Had a lot of fun doing that. But then I got a unique opportunity to build a game studio in Amsterdam with private funding. So this never happens, but investors going to a media company having money and wanting a game. Usually it's the other way around. And this media company wouldn't get in Amsterdam, didn't have a game division, but they somehow managed to persuade the investors that they would be able to do this. And when they got the deal, then they hired a lot of game developers. So me and a couple other guys got into this studio, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. But in general, what I like about games is it's creating little worlds. We're creating an experience, we're creating worlds kind of inspired by this world. We're playing God a little bit. We define the rules, we define the rights and wrongs, we create the choices. But I find that a fascinating aspect of game development. So this really keeps me going. And when my daughter used to play a lot with little characters, she would create stories and worlds, and she would be able to create, interactions between these characters. Of course, maximum of 2 at a time, because you only have 2 hands. Anybody here play Roller Coaster Tycoon? It's one of the best games ever. You create your own parks. Now it's a pixely shot, but I love this picture of this girl being fascinated by a miniature world. It's like a carnival. And then if you see the parallel with what basically, oops, oh, it's a touchscreen. What Roller Coaster Tycoon enables you to do is bring this world to life and control it and make decisions in it and let it move, and you can charge rates for the rides and stuff. And I find that really the power of the computer is to bring these worlds to life. It's still not better or anything else than stories or movies, but there's a cool thing about games is it brings worlds to life, and it can bring worlds, make them sort of believable. And basically we design worlds around the player, and the player has to get the sense that it's reality. And that's why we create artificial intelligence. Now in the gaming industry, that's not the same as in the serious world, because artificial intelligence in our world has to give you the idea that it's real. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't really have to create anything like AI. So AI in the gaming world is really about entertainment. It's really about giving the idea that there's a real world out there with people and places and stuff moving. Students of mine, I started teaching at the HQU in 2003. And students got a job through the town of Utrecht. They wanted to visualize all the changes to the station. So basically they got drawings of all the changes. So this is the time when the station wasn't built yet. This is 2006. Station wasn't built yet. Tivoli Vredenburg wasn't built yet. So we got drawings of all these buildings, and they created a little game where you had to color the city, and you used a sort of Toonie World version. So here you can clearly see the Oude Gracht, and this was already the new station. And this game, by playing it, you would get a sense of what Utrecht would look like after all the building was done. This game actually became so successful that it was picked up by American publishers, and they started calling us to see if they could buy it. And I was actually working on a horseback riding game at the time with studio, 30 people, lots of money going into it. And the publisher found my name on this list. I think it's somewhere over here. And he knew me, And he called me, and I thought he was going to buy my horseback riding game, but he was interested in my students' game. So that was a bit of a wake-up call that the new, the new generation was creating really what was wanted. And so it became a Wii game, and they recreated the game with a different character, but the same mechanic, the same idea of painting the whole city. And it was a really fun game, and actually had 2 versions made. Although THQ now is doesn't exist anymore. So it's also, that was one of the biggest publishers in the world in 2007, and now they're gone. So that's another thing about this industry. It's very volatile. One of the reasons that they're not here anymore is because they didn't make the switch to digital distribution quickly enough. So they were used to producing CD-ROMs in boxes, and that was what they knew, using the retail. But to sell games directly to users, which is one of the biggest changes that we've had in the last 10 years, they didn't respond to it quickly enough. So that's also the toughness of this business. It changes really fast. I think games are also a great tool to educate. I don't know if people ever heard of Verkeerspark Assen. Yay. Unfortunately, it does not exist anymore. It closed a couple of years ago.
Let's make it virtual.
So we need to make it virtual, yes. And in fact, that already exists, but this was so much fun. I remember going here when I was 12. I lived in Drenthe at the time, and yeah, we went with the whole class. And I was really busy just trying to cut corners and catch up with my friends all over the place. I got a ticket by a real cop, right? So they give you a real speeding ticket, or I don't know, I ran a red light probably or something like that. But at the end of the day, by accident, I kind of knew a lot of these signs, which is kind of boring if you just get a book with these signs. This was a great way to learn. So I really believe in the power of learning through games. Another great example, you have to look twice. It's like, hey, wait, this is actually, yeah. So I really think it's a great image. So games really are based on reality, just like stories and movies. We take inspiration from the world, and then we create our own fantasy versions of that. We built a game about horseback riding games. So these investors came up. There was one woman who was an experienced horseback rider. She got these rich guys together from her network, and she said, come on, let's go make a horseback riding game. There's millions of kids playing this. We need to do this. So indirectly, after a while, I got hired to set up the studio. I had worked a lot with game development people. I knew a bit about management, so they gave me this chance to, the 4 of us, 3 old colleagues from Davilex, of course, and we got this chance. Here's money, here's a place, go build this game. Great opportunity for me. So we built a studio. We were able to hire 35 people in a period of 2.5 years, all privately funded, so I didn't need to generate any revenue, so that was kind of a very luxury position. And we built this game, and it's true, there's a lot of kids out there riding horses, and especially girls. There was already a lot of games out there, but they were often a bit cheesy or just really cheaply made. So we saw this chance to build something nice and beautiful. And we built this game and produced it, and it actually halfway through the time that we worked on it, the Wii was introduced. The Nintendo Wii, which of course very much for the physical controls, so we made a whole control scheme where you can actually control the game by pretending it has these reins, the teugels, and it was really fun. But it meant 4 developers had to take horseback riding lessons. So here's 4 game developers taking lessons at the Hollandse Manege in Amsterdam, and that was interesting. This is actually literally the room. I don't know if anybody's ever been to that place. Our first game level was built on this, based on this room. But it was a game about dressuur and about the serious side of horseback riding. I was actually thrown off the horse once. I didn't realize that horses would do such a battle of the will. So they really try you out. So this horse took off. And then as I was just kind of holding on, then he would stop completely, like a full stop. And that kind of meant I went over. I made it, I survived. But and the rule over there is that you have to treat for cake the next time that you're there. So I did. At the time, we also had a real caring for the horse part. So really stroking, cleaning the horse, which is all a big deal. It was really cute. And it was the time when Nintendogs came out. I don't know if you guys remember this game, but it was all about, I mean, you could never think that somebody could make a game about cute little dogs, just cuddling them and stuff. But it was amazing. These games were really popular. And the guy who invented it, Shigeru Miyamoto, he's also the inventor of Mario games, Zelda, all these classics, Donkey Kong, that's all him. He's a real icon of the game industry. And I had to pitch this game to Nintendo in Los Angeles in 2006, I think. And all of a sudden the door opens and he comes in with his translator, and I got to pitch this horseback riding game to Mr. Miyamoto. I still have his card. He comes up like a really humble Japanese man and gives me his card, and me and my friend Martin were like blown away because we're big fans. So that was a big experience. Unfortunately, Nintendo didn't buy the game because they were busy producing stuff themselves, and we would have had to wait for another year, and our investors did not want to wait that long. So we ended up selling it to Atari. Now Claudia, who prepared me for this talk, insisted that I share a mistake, something that I did wrong. Well, the interesting lesson of this game is that we never made a good decision on what kind of game should this be. Should this be an arcade game? And by arcade I mean just really sort of kiddie and very exaggerated control schemes, easy, that kind of stuff. Or should it be more of a simulation? Should it be more of a realistic experience? Should it be more about what you learn from the game? And basically, if you know horseback riding well, what should it be? Now, meanwhile, we had acquired the Federation of Equestre Internationale. It's kind of like the FIFA of the horseback riding world. We acquired a license because we thought IP would work, because intellectual property or brands attached to our game would be a good thing. But they're all about the rules. They're all about proper horseback riding. There's so many rules there. I don't know, anybody here ride horses? It's amazing. So that kind of pushed us to a simulation. That's also what one of the investors really wanted. But it's really dangerous in a way because you lose the fun sometimes. I believe that a real true simulation is not a game anymore, because a real true simulation tries to mimic reality. So the further you get on this curve, the more it becomes exactly like reality, and reality is not always as much fun. This is often more fun. When I race games, you want to, go overboard, you want to hit things and stuff, but that's not reality, but that's a lot of fun. So our game got kind of stuck between these two extremes. So we kind of got sort of stuck in this dead space. For what is it? The player didn't really know. Like, we had a lot of games where you actually did this properly. It's really hard. So if you want to get these right, it's really difficult. So for young children or people who just have very little patience, it's very hard. This was sort of this cute, caring part, and our game kind of got stuck in between. And I think that showed in the sales. So it didn't really sell really well. It was acknowledged for its beauty. There was a lot of beautiful graphics in it, but the way it played, it was sort of unclear what it was really was. So we should have either gone completely for this, made it very serious, and then only sold it to those who really want to do that. I think if you really hit your niche well, you can still make good money. Or we should have made it very sort of kiddie and a little more cutesy and easier. And I think we failed to make that decision. That was a complex mix of me running a studio, never running a whole studio before. We went from 4 to 35 people, so you get past that 20 people mark where it's really hard to control who does what, communication. Then it's keeping the investors pleased, of course we tested the game on kids, but this kind of feedback we didn't pick up on. So it's a lesson. So I think whatever you do, make a clear decision what the profile is of your project. In terms of the future, people know Minecraft, probably you've heard of it. It's hard to miss, kind of. What's really significant about this game is it shows where we're heading. And I think where we're heading is that making games is going to get to be easier, and easier. So up to now, it's been very much a professional task to build games. But in the last 10 years, you've seen a lot of games that have editors that make it's easier to make content, and I think it's getting easier. And Minecraft is a great example because Minecraft already is an editor. It's kind of like playing in an editor. So you actually can build. My children are 8 and 10, and when they were like 5 and 7, they were already playing and building stuff in Minecraft. So what I see happening is that it's kind of the democratization of game development. So it's becoming much easier for people to play and make games. Why is that important? I think that if you ask who learned most about horseback riding games, or about horseback riding, me or the player? Our team learned a lot about horseback riding, even more than the player will ever know. And I think the way children may be learning through games will not be by playing games that others have built for them with all the proper educators and everything. No, I think it's going to be teachers giving children an assignment. Build a game about the Romans and read chapters 7 and 8 in your history book for reference. They'll be reading those chapters in a very different way than if they have to just read them and get a test on them. So the easier it gets to build games, the more this will happen. And I think that's sort of my statement for the future. I think that's where it's going. And yeah, so one of the signs of that is there's an educational version coming out, which also allows for teachers to put in a lot more stuff in there so children can easily do assignments within the game. And I think this is really interesting development. And I know Microsoft is going to push this really big. Of course, so that we all keep using Windows. But but still, they're on target with this. This is a good idea. So I think with all the tools that are out there, games building is going to get easier and easier and easier. And I think that's interesting also for creatives and also for people that work in businesses that are sort of linked to games. And I think children and parents will be making games together as well. So that's my vision for the world of gaming.